Obviously, we just finished up the March acronym. I really like acronyms in these scenarios for the obvious reason that it allows me to very easily and cleanly remember what I'm going through. It's ordered in a very specific order, right? Like M is first for a reason because M is the most important one, and then A and R obviously pair off of each other. So I like acronyms for that reason. When you're doing the challenge at Strenfest, like that's what you'll want to be doing, right? You'll want to be following that acronym in your own mind as you walk through these things.
Is there an acronym to remember all the acronyms?
Oh, there's only two.
Well, I meant like I feel like if I, when I've done things like this in the past, like by the end of the day, there end up being like 5 or 6 acronyms.
Right. No, you're not wrong. And I mean, no, I don't know of an acronym that helps you remember all the acronyms. But the theme I'm trying to go for with this stuff, and the theme that this stuff is taught with generally is simplicity. Like we're trying to get this stuff as simple as possible. We're trying to make it apply only to those things that will kill you quickest, precisely so that you just don't get overwhelmed with stuff like that. Interesting sort of, I guess, history or contextualizing all this. All of this information is based off of what's called the Stop the Bleed campaign, which in itself came from the military. There's a group in the military called the Committee on, what is it, TCCC, Committee on Tactical Combat Casualty Care is the idea. So again, soldiers need to be able to handle these emergency situations with their buddies so that they can get them back to a medic and treat the other items. This comes directly out of all of our experiences in the recent wars, in the war on terror and so on, right? And that is then filtered down to the population at large, because it turns out that just like soldiers are going to get into trouble, people generally get into trouble as well in things like car accidents or just normal accidents out and about. So that's where this all comes from. And just like how we want to make it so that every single soldier can do this stuff easily without having to think about it too hard, without being a medic, we want every single person to be able to do it as well.
So with Strenfest, Garrett, it sounds like we're gonna be put in situations where we've got to do this stuff. So like I think about like all of my, I have, stop the bleed kits, I have tourniquets, I have all my first aid stuff, but I should expect that I'm going to be popping that stuff open, and that I'm going to need to have both a practice set of gear and live real gear in case we need live real gear.
That's a really good question. I'm going to answer it in the wrong way. Well, not the wrong way, but I'm not going to answer exactly your question first by saying that what you just described of having both a practice kit and a real kit, I highly recommend that just generally. Mm-hmm. That doesn't answer your question, though, because you're asking about Strenfest specifically, and I am going to have my own practice gear for you guys to use at Strenfest. I don't want you guys to have to be buying practice gear. That being said, if you guys don't already have this equipment, I very much encourage you guys to invest in it and to invest in training. You mentioned doing, Stop the Bleed, or you mentioned a Stop the Bleed kit, but there are Stop the Bleed classes as well, which are put on by a group called Stop the Bleed Commission or something like that. I'm going to have a link to the website at the end, but like I very much recommend checking that out. Okay, I just got a Slack connection from EJ. I'm having trouble joining. Let's see if we can get him invited.
Does he have an email or something I can invite him on?
I'm going to copy the invite link and send it to him. Okay. I bet that's what he's looking for. For those of you who are in Arizona, at some point I'm going to hold a Stop the Bleed event for the Arizona group, one of these classes. There's actually a group that I work with that offers these things for free. So at some point we'll be doing that.
That's cool.
Yeah. All right, well, he's got the link. I'm not totally sure what the trouble he's having with joining, but I don't want to keep you guys waiting for too much more.
You don't have his email address, do you? Because I could just send him an invite too.
I sent it to him on Slack, and he's connected on Slack, so he should have it now.
All right.
Yeah, let's keep going.
Okay.
All right, picking back up where we left off with hypothermia. That's the end of March. And I think the thing I have after this is, post-March. So after you've gone through March, you've ideally stabilized your patient. They're now breathing again. Any sort of critical bleed has stopped. What do you do after that? Obviously, if you haven't already, let's get emergency services coming, because our major priority outside of stopping bleeding and starting breathing is getting the patient to a higher level of care. Brief digression on that. Higher level of care doesn't just mean getting to a hospital. It may mean, if you're out, in the woods, getting them to your car, where you maybe have more medical supplies, or where you're just that much closer to getting them to the hospital. There's this whole series of different levels of care that you can work with. But of course, the ultimate goal is to get them into a hospital where emergency personnel can work on them. So that's the first thing you'll want to do after you march someone is make sure that emergency services are on their way. But after that, you march them again. You keep marching. This doesn't literally mean that like you're just marching over and over and over again, but it does mean that if you have a wait before emergency services comes, you're going to run them through that same march scenario at least once every, 10 minutes, like every so often you're going to do it. The reason being, of course, that a tourniquet can loosen, or a wound pack can fail, or maybe you somehow missed a sucking chest wound the first time and they start breathing hard, or having a hard time breathing. You need to find it again. So you're going to keep checking on them. The acronym doesn't totally end when you get to that last part. You're going to keep doing it. And finally, evacuation. Again, we talked about how if emergency services are on their way and they can get to you, don't move. Let them come to you. Let them deal with it. But if you're in a scenario where the patient does need to get out on their own power, or otherwise needs to be carried out, you need to start thinking about how to do that. And I think that's the next slide that I have, which is about evacuation. Evacuating the patient happens only when it has to. If you don't have to, don't do it. Like we talk about firemen carrying, and it's super cool, but if there's not a reason to do it, don't make the patient's injuries worse by making them move around. But if they do need to get out, if at all possible, it's preferable to have them get out under their own power. We talked about how your safety as the responder is paramount, right? It's a dangerous thing to try to carry someone out. So if the person can do it, try to walk them out. That's why we do things like splinting, right? To make sure they can walk. In fact, this guy, has a splint and he's being helped out, but he is moving under his own power. That's the preferable way to evacuate. If, however, you cannot have them walk out under their own power, maybe they just can't move, or maybe they're unconscious, then we do need to think about how can we transport this patient. We talk about doing things like fireman carry in strenuous life. In fact, we just had that at Agon, right? The fireman carry is really good for moving someone over a short distance, but as everyone who did that Agon will know, it's not easy. It's difficult. It's exhausting. It's exhausting to you. It's also really hard for the person being carried. It's not a comfortable thing. And so don't think that you're going to carry some guy miles over the mountains to get him out. Like that's not a realistic solution. The fireman carry is much better for short things. You can do other sorts of carries that are easier to do and might go longer distances. We did these at the last Strenfest, and I think I have some like videos in the write-up. Maybe we'll cover that in this Strenfest as well. But in general, carries are not the way to evacuate someone if you can. Instead, you'll want to look into doing things more like a stretcher or what's called a travois. This picture is a picture of a man being carried in a travois. I guess sneak preview, we're going to be making travois at Strenfest, maybe as part of a different challenge. And so you'll get some experience doing that may be useful for the actual first aid challenge. But you can also make stretchers as well. Abe remembers we made a stretcher at Strenfest. This is the kind of thing that you can really take your time in doing correctly, because once you've reached the step where you're considering evacuating them, you've already stabilized them and got them dealt with. So you can take the time to build a proper method of transport. Any questions about any of that? No, all good. All right, let's talk about low light. Obviously, the sun is down for half the day, and so you need to know not just how to do first aid when you can see nicely, but also in the dark. The obvious thing to think about when you're dealing with a low light scenario is try to bring some light to that. So if you have lights handy, use them, but use them appropriately. When you're doing first aid, you want to have both your hands free. And so you'll want to rig your light in a way, or have someone hold it for you, but rig it in such a way that you don't have to be holding it in one hand while you're trying to work. I have here a picture of a guy, with a headlamp around their neck. That's a really good way of working with a patient. Having it around your neck like that helps you to not blind them, but you can still see them really well. So obviously illuminate the scenario with everything you can. We also talked about earlier doing things like the pinch and roll when you're looking for blood. The reason you do that is because you're going to need to go by touch, right? You may not be able to see things, or even if you have a flashlight, you may not be able to see super well. And so working in low light requires you to use a lot more touching, a lot more hands-on. The pinch and roll is one such example of that, but you can imagine how other things like checking for breathing, you may need to rely a lot more on touch and feel than you would be able to do otherwise. We are going to be doing some low light stuff at Strenfest. It's kind of hard to describe how low light is different without actually doing it, and so you'll get to see it. But the good news is that if you follow March, and if you do the same things you were doing in the daylight, just with like the low light emphasis, then you'll be just fine doing low light first aid. Any questions about that? Good. I want to acknowledge some of the dangerous stuff that we didn't cover. We talked about how, for the most part, that the really dangerous things you need to worry about are going to be bleeding and breathing, right? And that's true. Those are the number one and number two causes of preventable death in the United States. But it's not like there aren't some other things that won't kill you fairly quickly. And so I do want to acknowledge those things. One of those things is what I've called true hypothermia here. The idea there being that I'm referring to someone who has like fallen in a frozen pond during the dead of winter, right? If you're soaked in the cold like that, you can succumb to hypothermia pretty quickly, like within the order of minutes, dozens of minutes, perhaps. I guess very quickly talking about what you do in those scenarios, like get them out of the wet clothes, get them warm as best as you possibly can. That is an emergency that needs quick acting, but it's also just a little bit outside of the scope for what I wanted to cover today. Choking, we talked about airway stuff. We talked about Heimlich. I didn't really go over Heimlich. I think most people know it. I guess it kind of falls into March, right? But when we talk about breathing and respiration in March, we're kind of thinking more about people who have difficulty breathing for other reasons than just choking. But obviously know the Heimlich, know how to clear a blocked airway, because that obviously is also a dangerous scenario. And I acknowledge, right, when we talk about CPR, that I wasn't going to cover it. There is a specific method to CPR. There is a specific rate that you want to cover it at. This is something that a lot of people don't know. CPR also should be violent enough to break ribs. You likely are going to break ribs when performing CPR properly. It does need to be that forceful. And so it's another thing that you can cover in depth a lot. And we didn't go into it for this one, just for the sole reason that it's hard to demo, and I think a lot of other people know it. But I did want to acknowledge those things. I think that's the last one. Oh, no, spinal injuries. There is one more. This is an area kind of debate when we talk about emergency medicine, stuff that's out in the wilderness. Is to what degree do you worry about spinal injuries or injuries to the neck, maybe? The education that I've received does not emphasize this, for the reason that it's preferable to keep someone alive, even if they end up getting their spinal injury exacerbated by your treatment. Put that another way, you should not be afraid of moving a patient if you will save their life by doing so, even if they have mechanisms for spinal injury. That being said, there is a place for this within emergency first aid. It shouldn't be totally ignored. I'm not going to go over it, number one, because again, it's a little bit too much for what we're trying to do here. And also because it's something that I personally just don't know quite as much about. But I didn't want to go through this without acknowledging that in some way. I encourage you guys to look into this yourself, of course, but for now, we're not going to touch it. Any questions about that? No, good to go. All right. This is new to a lot of people. It was obviously very new to me when I first did it. And so you guys will want to practice this stuff so that you show up to Strenfest ready to participate in the challenge. Here are some suggestions for how to do that. First off, get the equipment that you'll need. We mentioned 2 types of equipment that are going to be really important here. Actually, 3: a tourniquet, gauze, and chest seals. Get these items. I really should probably put a list of those things for you guys at some point somewhere, but those 3 are the ones that I would start with. And I listed a brand here, the CAT tourniquet. That's a brand. It's not an acronym. Sorry, it is an acronym, but it's also a brand. I'm telling you guys to get that one. There's a lot of tourniquets out there. This is the one that I think is by far the best, like hands down. I don't think there's a reason to get a different one. And it's not like they're expensive. You can get a CAT tourniquet for like $30. So just get one of those if you don't have one already. Get the other equipment as well. Get gauze, get chest seals. Like we talked about earlier, get both a real version for real use and a practice version. There's a picture of a CAT tourniquet. I guess the only other thing to say about it is to look out for fakes, because there are some fakes out there. The company that makes them is North American Rescue, so try to buy from them if you can.
Hey Garrett, what's the difference between that and like the soft TQ?
Good question. The soft T is a very similar design. It looks really similar to it. There's a couple differences where the soft T has metal buckles while the CAT has plastic. Some people think that makes it a little bit more reliable. But the biggest problem that I find with the soft T is that it's really hard to apply one-handed due to its buckle design. Whereas with the CAT, it's much easier to apply one-handed. And because you are getting this equipment for yourself, yeah, let's make it so that you can do it with just one hand.
Got it. Thanks.
Those are my thoughts on the matter. There's other tourniquets out there. God, I shouldn't go too deep into this, but I'll mention it. There's one called the Rats that's kind of popular. It's got like a lot of marketing behind it. It doesn't look anything like the CAT. It doesn't have a windlass. It has a really thin band. All of these things are like the worst things you can ever imagine with a tourniquet. So if you guys have heard of that, I would not get a Rats. And if you bought one, don't feel bad about it. We had a discussion on the forums a while back about it, where some people were talking about it, and like I could tell they bought one, and I felt bad telling them that they bought a piece of crap. But yeah, don't deal with that one, and don't deal with anything that doesn't look like a CAT. Just get a CAT. That's my advice on the matter.
And you said North American Rescue, right? That makes that
North American Rescue. Okay, second tip, just do March, right? Find the time to run March on yourself, on your family between now and Strenfest. Not just for Strenfest, but like so it, right? Come up with a scenario. Imagine that, I don't know, you were working out in the garage and you cut yourself on a saw and now you've got a critical bleed. March yourself. Have your family come up with scenarios and march them. March your friends. Make it into a strenuous life event. Like if, I don't know, if you're not in Arizona, or if you are in Arizona, just come up with an event and do it. I don't know what I'm trying to communicate there, but march yourself. That's the way to practice this stuff. Like there's no way to practice this without actually doing it. Do each of these things at least once. Do that blood sweep. If you're married, do it on your wife. Do it on your friend if you're not married. Do the blood sweep. Like get experience with what that feels like to do it. The most important thing there is to do it with the appropriate level of pressure and to do it systematically. Don't just like run your hands just up and down their body without stopping. Stop every little bit to look and to pinch to feel for the blood. Do the blood sweep. Apply the tourniquet. Do it on yourself. Do it on others. Can't say much more than that. Rake the torso to find a chest wound. Imagine you're looking for something that's really hard to find because they are. Rake and look for it. Apply a chest seal. Get a chest seal and actually put it on. Just see what it feels like to open the packaging and put the chest seal on somebody. It's really simple, but give it a try. Try splinting. Do the technique we talked about. Find a stick or a pole. There are splints that you can buy. There's one called the Sam splint, which is really useful. It rolls up and then you can unroll it. Consider getting one of those and try using it. But you can also do it with a stick or a hiking pole or anything that's rigid that you can find and try splinting it. And then get some emergency blankets and just try using them. That picture I showed used the common aluminum foil emergency blankets that you can get for like $3. So you can get those and practice them. Don't feel bad about using them because it's so cheap. But be aware that they also are cheap for a reason, right? They're not that great. So consider getting a more expensive one for your real kit. And yes, finally, consider practicing doing some evacuation stuff. Try doing the fireman's carry if you haven't already for the AGAM. look up how to make a travois and try making one. You may be glad you did at Strenfest is my hint. And I think that's the last of the items how to practice. There's a link to a website called stopthebleed.org. Like I was talking about earlier, this is the organization that kind of codifies this and takes the information from that committee, the TCCC committee that I mentioned earlier. Go to that website and look at their resources. They have videos showing this stuff. They also have links to classes in your area that you can take to learn this stuff. I would not think that would be a waste of time if you were to take that class. So check that stuff out. And I believe that's the end. So are there any questions about anything that we have gone over?
The only other question I had is, are you bringing an AED?
No, I'm not. That's a good question. We didn't go over or AEDs or heart attacks or things like that generally in this. And, it's a good point because that is one of the things that will also or could also kill someone pretty quickly. If I had one, I'd bring one. I do not. There are trainers. I shouldn't assume. Do we all know what AED is? Okay, we do. Yeah. There are trainers out there that are kind of cool. They're just like the real ones. They'll give you the instructions. But no, I don't have one, so I won't be bringing one.
I can bring ours just to have it.
Oh, that's awesome. Okay, yes, if you have that, then bring it and we can look at it. I guess it's a real one, so we won't actually use it. But,
you're right.
Yeah, bring it. It'd be
All
cool
right.
to talk through how it works.
Yep.
Yeah, good question, man. Thanks for bringing that up.
Yep.
What else we got? Or did I mostly answer stuff as we went through?
It's good stuff. Really appreciate the work you put into this. It's I can tell it's a lot of work and it's impressive, and thanks for it.
Thank you. This
great job delivering it too. I think it's awesome.
Thank you much. This stuff in particular is important to me. This is something I meant to mention during the presentation. I forgot to, but I think this stuff is particularly important to us as Strenuous Life members because we're doing the kind of things that puts us more at risk, right? We're outdoors more. We're handling firearms. We're doing dangerous things, and so everybody should know this, but especially us. Not just to take care of ourselves doing dangerous things, but we also, as we have accepted the higher responsibility that comes with being a member of the Strenuous Life, that means that we have a higher responsibility to take care of others as well. So another reason why this stuff is important, and so I care about it a lot. That all being said, my presentation is not a replacement for a real teacher teaching you this stuff in a real class that would have gone for a lot longer and a lot more in depth. So very much encourage you guys to check those out as you can. Okay, if there are no other questions, then I think we can wrap it up for now. Guys, thank you much for attending the second workshop. I'm glad that we got a decent turnout to the second one as well. I'll of course be posting this recording online just like I did the last one, so you can always review this. As always, feel free to ping me with any questions you come up with later. And I will see you guys in the next workshop.
Yeah, thanks. And thanks for posting that first one.
Absolutely. Thank you much, guys.
I appreciate it. Have a good one. Bye.
See you later.
Bye.
Bye.